Good evening, everyone. We continue our study in the book of Second Kings. We're now in Second Kings chapter 22. The reason why we have chapter 21 on the right hand side is for a bit of a comparison, something that might interest you this evening. When we read in Second Kings chapter 22 and in verse 1, it begins this way. It says, Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, a very young king, and he reigned for 31 years in Jerusalem. I just want to highlight to you this particular word, 8 years old, and that it could be actually translated in a slightly different way, not pointing to the age of Josiah, but the reign of Josiah. And one of the reasons why I think that way is because of Second Kings chapter 21. When we go to Second Kings chapter 21 and in verse 19 here on the right hand side of the screen, you find that the father Amon was 22 years old when he became king, and he only reigned for 2 years in Jerusalem. So, what you would find is that by the time Amon died, he was 24 years old. So, we have here 24 years old when he died. 22 plus 2. Now, if Josiah was 8 years old, it means that Amon, as a father, would have begat him at the age of 16 years. And I would imagine it would be generally an extremely young age for a boy to actually have a son. And so I am of the opinion, and again, it's my opinion, that the it is not possible for Josiah to be 8 years old when he became king. So the translation should better read this way. It should say 8 years, an 8 year period when Josiah reigned. I think this is a better translation, meaning 8 years into the period when Josiah reigned, not that he was 8 years old. Now, we don't know how old Josiah was. Possibly he was 8 years old. That his father Amon had him when he was 16 years old. Whatever that may be, now both are perspectives. And in this session, I just want to show you two perspectives of this event. One was that he was 8 years old, according to all the translations, or most of the translations. And the second is a translation that it was 8 years into the time when he became king. Now, obviously, when Amon is 24 years old, we really don't know how old Josiah was when he became king. Because at the time when Amon died, uh, we are not told how old Josiah was. All we know is that we can read that the people of the land killed those who conspired against King Amon and made his son Josiah king in his place. Now, it is something that we would need to deal with next week when we come to chapter 23. So, for this evening, just understand that the beginning of chapter 22 in verse 1, we have two possible alternatives. We read in verse 2, we are told that the conduct of Josiah, and you must know that he is the last righteous king. You know, the whole sequence of kings, Amaziah, who is also known as Uzziah, then he had Jotham, and then he had Ahaz. After Ahaz, his son is Hezekiah. Then his son was Manasseh, and then Amon. And now we have Josiah. Now, the reason why I highlighted this to you is that you can now see that Uzziah is a good king. So is Jotham. When it came to Ahaz, he is a bad king. Hezekiah turned out to be a good king. Then we have Manasseh, started off as bad and then became good. Then Amon turned everything around, and now we have Josiah. Now, Josiah would have been very young at this time, uh, not even 8 years old, maybe, but doesn't matter. But the idea here is this: he was just too young to realize things. And as he grew up, that is why it says that 8 years into his reign, then he will be a bit older. And we are now told that Josiah did what was right in the sight of God, what was right in the eyes of God. And he walked. Now, in verse 2, this word walked entirely is all the way of his father David and did not turn aside to the right or to the left. It's a very Hebrew Eastern way of expression that if you walk, you are supposed to walk straight and you don't veer to the left or the right so that you can maintain your path as a straight line, basically, as a straight line. And so you follow this path and he doesn't turn left or right. Basically, to say that, yep, that is a very straight. And this word right is yasha, and yasha is also straight. That is also the meaning. So, not turning to the left or right describes the straightness in the way that he conducted his life. Now, in verse 3, it says, now in the 18th year of King Josiah, between verses 1 and 3, 18 years would have passed. And that might mean that there is a change. Because in verse 3, we see this word now really is and then. In the 18th year, something happened. Now, please bear in mind a little bit of the background. Because of what Manasseh did, and it was repeated by Amon, this period is probably the darkest period in the history of the Judah kingdom. Even Ahaz didn't do as badly, but Manasseh and then Amon did even worse. The, the way that the society has turned out is that they were not able to recover back to the days of David. And in the early days of Josiah, as he was raised by Amon, understand that Amon would have been teaching Josiah all the bad things in life. And Josiah would not have come up by himself, just being a good king or a young person. So you need to bear that in mind in the historical context. That he only learned to do what was straight and right in the eyes of God when he began to learn more about the Torah. So after Amon died, we can safely assume that he had a good teacher. And that is what we are told about this particular passage in verse 1. And his mother's name was Yedidah. Yedidah means beloved. And it is very similar, very close to the name that God gave to Solomon, Shlomo. And he was a daughter of Adadya of the place called Botzkat. Botzkat. Now, these are probably little remote places in the kingdom of Judah. The reason why I want to point out to you is this: when you get a name like Yedidah, uh, Yedidah literally means that he is beloved. No, one who is well loved. Now, whether this is well loved by God or not, it's not found in the name, but I am making a speculation that it is probably the bringing up at this point in time after Ammon had died that he began to learn things regarding the Torah. He couldn't have done it while Ammon was still alive. That is what I was trying to point out. And while Josiah was still very young, and now fast forward 18 years. When you fast forward 18 years, this major event happened. The major event here says the king sent Shaphan, uh, and Shaphan, who is the son of Azalyahu, in the English is Azaliah, the son of Meshulam, the scribe, to the house of the Lord, which is the temple. And he says this. Now, the reason why verse 23 is highlighted is because King Josiah, as he has grown up, you add 18 years to his life, he's learned a little bit more about the Torah, and he is more righteous and straight as he grows up, and he sees the decay of the temple of God. Now, this is important because this is very similar to the time of King Jehoash in chapter 12. And he also did this. And in chapter 22, 10 chapters down the road, Josiah does the same. We now read that he says, go up to Hilkiah, the high priest, and have him count all the money brought into the temple, which the doorkeepers have collected from the people. In verse 5, he continues, and have them handed over to the workmen who have the oversight of the house of the Lord, meaning to upkeep, and then have them give it to the workmen who are in the house of the Lord to repair. Now, in verse 5, it says to repair the breach of the house. The damage here basically means the leaking, the leaks, the gaps. Maybe there are holes, and basically just needs some repair, and it needs money to repair it. And so give it to the carpenters, the builders, the masons, and for buying timber. And timber is very expensive in Israel, so they have to get it from Lebanon, and cut stone to repair the house, in this case, the house of God. However, no accounting shall be made with them for the money handed over to them, because they deal honestly. Now, this is very interesting to talk about the character of these people. This idea here, honestly, is trustworthily. Trustworthily. Meaning, from the past of how they've been doing things, you don't need to check on them and be micromanagers over them. Just give them the money and they will know what to do, because these people had spent their entire lives given to maintaining the temple of God. Verse 8. Then, this is then in verse 8, and then Hilkiyahu, the high priest, said to Shaphan, the scribe, and in spring cleaning, perhaps, he says this, I have found, and this is important, the book of the Torah in the house of the Lord. And then Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan, who read it. Now, you have to think with me some of the issues here. This is the book of the Torah. It is not a legal book. This word translated as law may not be as good a word to use. And this is a specific the book. When we come to, I guess you can talk about Second Chronicles. Second Chronicles chapter 34 and in verse 14 might suggest that this was the one that was given by Moses. Now, there are two ways of reading it, basically. It is just saying that the book of the Torah and the Torah that was given by Moses, or the book of the Torah as a whole was given by Moses. Now, obviously, there is a difference. Uh, but because there is such a commotion that the scrolls were found and everybody was surprised. And why would that be? Where we the traditions tells us that during the time of Achaz, he just kept it in the Holy of Holies, locked it up, and Manasseh didn't bother with it. And Ammon was the one who had done a lot of destruction, but apparently they were saved. And this is important because this happens to be the original scrolls that were given by Moses. Now, if that be the case, then it might fit the narrative that this was a very special scroll. Now, it cannot be that they had no Torah. That would not be the case. Because if there is no Torah, then Josiah would never have learned anything. So it was important for us to now understand that we are not talking about the fact that the whole nation had no Torah scrolls and suddenly out of the blue they found one Torah scroll. That's not the case. So the way that the Jewish people think of this is that there is a special Torah scroll likely to be given by Moses in that sense. And then Shaphan the scribe came to the king, King Josiah, and brought back word to the king and said, your servants have emptied out the money that was found in the house, and then have handed over to the workmen who have oversight of the house of the Lord to make the repairs. Moreover, in verse 10, there is the and then concept here. And then Shaphan the scribe informed the king, saying, you know what, King? Hilkiah the priest has given me a book. And Shaphan read it in the presence of the king. Now, that it was well thought that the passage that was read uh, was in the book of Deuteronomy. Now, this is all by tradition. So let me just give you the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, verse 36. The reason why I bring this up to you is that this is commonly understood in the traditions of what was actually read. The scroll, when it opened up, may have a bookmark of some sort, and the scroll just happened to roll out at that particular place. And so in verse 36, it says, Jehovah will bring you and your king, whom you appoint over you, to a nation that neither you nor your fathers have known, and there you shall serve other gods made of wood and stone. Now, this is a very important piece of information if it is true that he has read it. And it appears that by tradition, when he read this, that it talks about the exile. And at this point in time, the northern kingdom was already exiled. Now we have the southern left, which he is king. And he is seeing this, that if they don't do what is right, this is going to be the repercussion. And that is in the mind of Josiah. Now, otherwise, we would find it very hard to figure out why in verse 11 it says this. When the king heard the words of the book of the Torah, he tore his clothes. It is a reaction to what he read. And the reaction is he was very shocked, very disappointed, and it cut into his heart. Basically, he was given a wake up call. Now, if that is the case, this is the turning point of his life. And this may be the time of the 8 years uh, into the reign when he grew up that he understood. Now, the idea here that we need to understand is this point in time is a very important point in time. Tells us that after a period of time, 18 years, another 10 years after that, uh, he was given this shocking news. Because he was already in tune with the Torah, hearing these words as a king talks to him that he is going to be brought, you and your king, which means himself, to another nation, to another land that they have never known. And that is what and why he tore his clothes. It's in disappointment, in shame, in humility, in response to the Torah. Verse 12. Verse 12 says this, and then the king commanded Hilkiah the priest, Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, and Akbor, the son of Micaiah, Shaphan the scribe, and then the last one here is Asaiah, the king's servant. And he says this, go, go as an instruction. Go, inquire, search, find out of God for me and for the people and all Judah concerning the words of this book. Understand, the words of this book is what he has read, not the entire Torah. That has been found, for the wrath of the Lord that burns against us is great, because our fathers did not listen to the words of this book to act accordance with everything that is written regarding us. So I'm just suggesting that it's likely that the Jewish tradition is quite correct because it is prompting and driving Josiah to take desperate actions. So Hilkiah the priest, Ahikam, and then we have Akbor, Shaphan, and Asaiah went to Huldah. Huldah, the prophetess, the wife of Shallum, the son of Tikva, the son of Harchas, keeper of the wardrobe. Now, keeper of the wardrobe means the royal robes, and she lived in Jerusalem in the second quarter, and they spoke to her. Now, this second quarter uh, is a translation. We don't have a second quarter here. It just says it's in the uh, a second sector, uh, and a place where people study. I think that is a possible translation. So instead of a second quarter, it can mean the place where people study. So it will be a study hall or study room or study section of some sort. Verse 15, and then she said to them. Now understand that we are still following the protocol is this. We have God, we have king, and then we have prophet. And so we need to understand the way of the interaction. The interaction is this: the king wants to speak to God, God speaks to the prophet, and the prophet speaks to the king. So it is important for us then to understand that while the king is seeking God, he is actually going to the prophet to seek God. That is how it has been happening, and is arranged by God. Now, in this case, they went to the prophetess called Huldah. And Huldah said this: This is what Jehovah said. This is like how all the prophets speak. Thus says the Lord. But in this English translation, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I think it is important for us to realize that the prophet, or the prophetess in this case, receives the information from God in some supernatural way, and he is now telling the king, this is what the Lord is saying. Tell the man who you who sent you to me, and that would be, the man is the king. This is speaking to all the servants. So the servants went to the prophet or prophetess. It says, this is what God says. Verse 16, the Lord has said this. And he says that, behold, I am going to bring disaster. Remember all these words? Disaster is evil. On this place and on its inhabitants, and all the words of the book which the king of Judah has read. And so this is talking about that destruction. So based on this, it appears that the Jewish tradition, and they have examined this for a longer time than I would have, is the part of Deuteronomy, where they actually read that part of the book. Deuteronomy chapter 28 and verse 36. Since they have abandoned me and have burnt incense to other gods, so that they may provoke me to anger with all the work of their hands, my wrath burns against this place, and it shall not be quenched. Now, when you read things like this, it means that at the time of Ammon, the society has turned really bad. And this society never recovered, even at the time of Josiah. He himself is a good king, but the society has not turned around. And so Josiah is purely focused only on the faithful, loyal ones to God. But the rest of the society has been abandoning God and burnt incense to other gods, and God's wrath is against them. Verse 18, but to the king of Judah who sent you to inquire of God, this is what you shall say to him. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. And he says this regarding the words which you have heard. Since your heart was tender, and you humbled yourself before the Lord when you heard what I spoke against this place and against its inhabitants, this is an actual reference to a few things. One is that the heart is tender. The idea of tender means it's soft. That's all it says. It is soft. It's pliable. It's willing to listen. And then it says here that you have humbled yourself. You have understood that you are human. You're not God. And you have read Deuteronomy chapter 38. That is what it means. When you heard what I spoke in the Torah against this place and against its inhabitants, that they would become an object of horror, And a curse that you have torn your clothes and wept before me. I have indeed heard you. So it is important for us to realize chapter 28, verses 36, even 37. So when we read this heard, it means that it was read to him when Shaphan read to him. He tore the clothes and God saw, declares the Lord. We now look at the last verse here. Therefore, no, therefore really means a conclusion. On this account, I think that was a good way. On this account. What account? Because your heart was tender, pliable, you humbled yourself, you tore your clothes and wept before me, and that is humility. Humility, knowing that he is man and he cannot fight what God has declared. And so this is the declaration of God. So God is saying, behold, you have humbled yourself. I am going to gather you to your fathers. This is similar to what God says to Abraham. No, you're not going to inherit the land. Your children will be, but you will be gathered to your fathers. The idea here is you will die in peace, right? You will die in peace. And you'll be with your fathers ahead of you, buried, and you'll be gathered to your grave in peace. Now, this word peace is shalom. Understand this word shalom. It literally means peace because there is completeness. Completeness means nobody is after you, and you are not after anyone else. So in a nation where a king is at peace, it means there is no war. He's not going to fight anyone, and there is nobody else out there who's waiting to fight him. That's why there is shalom. And so he will go and die in peace. That's basically it. He will not, and your eyes will not see all the devastation that I am going to bring on this place, which also tells us that this devastation in verse 20, and this is evil. This is the word. God is going to bring evil on this place because of what the kings would be doing. And that would also come after Josiah. And after the servants heard all these things, they brought back the word to the king. So the king will hear all this. The servants heard it first, and the servants understood. Now that we read it, we too should understand that Josiah is well liked by God, is given the opportunity to rule in peace because he is walking right with God. He's walking straight with God. So, in his entire rule, as we have seen, for his entire rule for 31 years, it would have been mostly peaceful. The early years, a bit of turmoil. Why? Because he was just too young as a king. But because he was taught the Torah and he stood up firm in honor of God in his reign, he focused on the house of God to repair. And then he repented and he saw and read from the Torah scroll that was found by Hilkiah, and he he was cut in his heart. He realized that he has to do more, but because of his attitude towards God, God is going to spare him, that he will not see devastation in his life. Very similar to the father or grandfather, if you want to call it that way, uh, Father of Ammon is Manasseh. And then the father of Manasseh is Hezekiah. And Hezekiah had the same pronouncement by God that he will not see devastation in his sight, meaning during the time when he is alive. But it happened to Manasseh because the king of Assyria would have come and have taken them away. Now in Josiah, Josiah is also given the privilege that there will be peace in his life. And that is what most kings are wanting to achieve, that there is peace and harmony and success and prosperity. And God is blessing the place because they are all obedient to God because of the king. And hence the king is important, and the people are rewarded because the king was humbled before God and knows that he is man. Although he is king over the people of God, he is still man. And he trusts God, is loyal to God, and gives his life to God. And that in itself tells us why Josiah holds such a high esteem in the pages of Scripture. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.